Welcome to Cover Book Beat. I'm your host, Roger Nichols. Our guest today is an award-winning author. What's most unusual, though, is that Danny Hendrickson has won those awards in genres as different as westerns, military fiction, historical fiction, and women's fiction. He's a native of Sheridan, Wyoming, and comes from a literary family. And then his father had a master's degree in English and loved to write poetry and plays. That led Dan to attend Casper Community College, where he majored in journalism, one of our boys. As his biography states, he found he had an aptitude for investigative reporting, but decided his interests were in other areas. He went on to do much volunteer Christian ministry work throughout the United States, earning a degree in practical theology along the way. He's also well versed in the secular world, having worked in law enforcement as an emergency medical technician and firefighter. He also helped run a martial arts school where he was a senior instructor. And as a first for us, and after interviewing more than 800 authors, he and his wife Cheryl have owned 3 different auto detailing businesses, a very interesting aspect. His latest book, The Living Legend, is actually a prequel to a trilogy he has written, which includes The Last Enemy, The Good Fight, and The Commander. We're very pleased to welcome Dan E. Hendrickson. Good morning.
Oh, good morning, Roger. Thank you for having me.
What a delight. But before we touch on the living legend, I'd like to find out a bit more about you and your background. When did you decide to become a writer? Or was that always going to be happening?
Um, I think it's always going to be happening. I was writing books in the third grade. Uh, had a teacher that really encouraged me, and I wrote little storybooks, and she put them all in a binder and put them together for me. Uh, I tried my hand at journalism, and to tell you the honest to God truth, I didn't like it so much because it was pretty biased in the way they wanted me to report, at least the
Oh,
places that I worked.
wow.
So I kind of left that and I went into the ministry, and I did a lot of Christian ministry work. And along the way, because, a lot of times that's volunteer,
Hmm.
I took on a whole bunch of different types of jobs. Like you said, I've been involved with emergency medical, I've been involved with firefighting, I've been involved with law enforcement. Uh, but one thing that I learned in college was how to detail cars. And I just kept falling back on that one every place because I get sent to different ministry assignments, and and it's real easy to go rent a little shop and go get some contracts from some dealers and clean their cars for them.
Yeah.
And over the years, I've done that a lot. And right now, we own a shop in Manheim, Pennsylvania. We've been there since 1998, and it's not just a detail shop; it's a detail shop, it's a full body shop, and it's also
Oh,
a
wow.
dealership.
Wow.
And so we've been
Congratulations
running
on.
that. And you know what? That put my kids through college and everything. So I'm very, very blessed with that operation.
Well,
Uh, and about 5 years ago, I just decided I wanted to write again. And I got an idea about a book. And it was called The Good Fight. And it led to my Last Enemy series, which is The Good Fight, The Cartel Crusher. And then the last book in that series is The Last Enemy. And then it led to these other books that I've written that are all prequels to that, where I just saw that some of the characters got pretty popular from those books, and I decided to elaborate on them. And this last book, The Living Legend, is just that. It's an elaboration on the principal character's mentor, who was a man who was a Navy SEAL, and he gained the rank of captain, and he started an anti-cartel, anti-terrorist task force involving military and law enforcement. And my guy in those 3 books was recruited into his program. I had so many questions and so many interests in this guy, I decided to tell his backstory.
you
So
know that we are, as a culture, fascinated with origin stories.
yeah,
Uh, Between all the pop culture, all of the superheroes, all the heroes of all sorts, and this is a particularly engrossing. One of the things that I do when I read books is I take lots of notes. I didn't
hmm,
take hardly any notes in your book. And you know why? Because your prose is so transparent. I wasn't thinking of me taking notes or how clever you're writing the sentence. I was in the story.
that was my
That's
goal.
that is fabulous, fabulous step. So before I do any spoilers, maybe I'll get you to just run down the plot because it's a really fascinating plot.
Well, the story really starts 100 years ago with a man named Tamani Ali in Kenya, Africa, and he was a freedom fighter. And what he did was he went after Islamic slavers that came into his country and stole his people and brought them back to sell them to the harems and stuff. And he hunted these people down into Asia and rescued his people and brought them back to Africa. And he became quite a folk hero in his home country. Well, 100 years later, you have his great granddaughter, who her name is Makena Ali, and she decides to take up his cause. Now, of course, she's not a warrior, so she does it more politically. And on the other side of the world, you have a young Navy ensign by the name of Tommy Williams, who just graduated from Annapolis. He's in Japan, and he's visiting his father, who's the American ambassador to Japan. And so Tommy is there to celebrate his graduation with his dad. Well, when they're out in an outdoor cafe and they're toasting his celebration with a little cup of sake, and his dad gets assassinated. So his dad dies right before his eyes. Now, this changes Tommy's life. Tommy was going to be just like his dad. His dad also was an Annapolis grad. He was the 187th African-American ambassador appointed by a president from the United States. He was a JAG lawyer in the military. And so Tommy was going to do the same thing. Tommy graduated second in his class in Annapolis, which is incredible. And he had a one-way ticket right to Ivy League college, where he was going to get his law degree and go right back into the service as probably as a lieutenant in the JAG service. So when he saw his father killed, he decided he wanted to go after whoever killed him. Found out it was a Russian assassin. And through a bunch of series of events, he gets put on the path of going into the newly formed Navy SEALs. Now, back in 1974, which is when this took place, the Navy SEALs was a very young program. It just started out, and it was at Little Creek, Virginia, instead of out on the West Coast back then. And he went there to get trained, and because he wanted to learn the skills to go after somebody like this Russian assassin, whom he was told by other people in the special forces was somebody that he could never touch unless he had the skills to do it. Mm-hmm. He was a very intelligent, naval officer, but he wasn't a killer. Didn't have the training, so that's why he went into SEALs. And he graduated, and inadvertently, his first mission out on the field takes him to Asia and then eventually Africa, where he is pitted against this guy who killed his dad, because this guy is also involved with the Islamic slavers. And so, not to do any more spoilers, him and Makena have to work together, so to speak, and he has to rescue some people, and they both have to bring back alive the legend of Tammany Ali, which was the freedom fighter. And Tommy uses his Tammany's tactics to rescue these people and to stop the Russian assassin.
That is
I didn't give too many spoilers, but that's pretty much the story.
It's beautifully done. In many ways, this is a story with multiple aspects to it. I mean, I'm always a fan of one where you start with one character and then you start another thread with another character and then you blend them together in the end, and that's what happens here. Yeah. And you also do the prequel way back when, 100 years ago, and show how those events affect the events of today. That's another favorite of mine. But it's also, in addition to an action and adventure story, and it's a coming of age story a bit for Tommy as he gets trained as a Navy SEAL. That's fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
And by the way, without giving you too much away, there is a War Games scenario in which the tactics that he employs just had me thrilled. It was probably the best scene in the book for my money in terms of how clever he worked all of the angles on it. And I won't say any more about that, but I'm just say you must have had a lot of fun with that. I just see you sitting at the keyboard laughing as you're doing that part.
Oh, yeah, it was fun. And I read a lot of books about how Navy SEALs are trained, and I read some scenarios during their training, like and some of that stuff was taken from those books. And those, my hat's off to those special forces guys, because what they go through to get as good as they are is just incredible. They are heroes through and through and through. I mean, and the more I studied it, the more in awe I was at these people and what they have to go through to serve in the military. It's just incredible.
Well, it also, there's a pretty sophisticated political component to the book as well, talking about what's going on in Kenya at the time and how some people in the administration are actually behind some of the bad stuff going on, and how
Sure.
you deal with that in a situation where the forces of society are not as honest as you would hope that they would be.
Yeah. And plus this all happened during the whole Iran crisis, where they invaded our embassy and
Hmm.
took them hostage back in 1979. It also took place during the time when Russia invaded Afghanistan, and so I liked using that dichotomy to put the whole Kenyan problem, and how nobody noticed what was going on,
Well, yeah.
with poor little Makena and her movement, because of these great big powers doing all these things.
Hmm.
And so it was kind of neat having that in there, and that's how I worked the whole Soviet uh participation, and the assassin being a Soviet assassin and all that, because it was them that were behind a lot of that happened over there during that time.
Oh, I love the fact that the assassin's name is the Chameleon.
Yeah.
That was so much fun. Is that something that just came to you, or you said, "Oh, I've got
Yeah,
to
that
make
was
it"?
like from the series. He's actually the last enemy in my
Ah,
series. He's
okay,
he's the big crime boss that really he's taken down in my first set of books. So this is a prequel. And
okay,
so Tommy has to run into him again later on in life, which I do show in the book that
okay.
that was kind of set up.
And I'm sorry, this is my introduction to your work, but I can tell that there goes the rest of my spring here. So I'm going to have to read all the other, the other ones. Um, In addition to a strong military background, I note you have very strong female characters, and I suspect I've read that that may occur because you have very strong female characters in your family.
Oh yes, I have two very, very strong-minded young daughters, and one is an ABC 6 reporter in Philadelphia, Becca
Wow.
Hendrickson. The other one is just got her master's degree, and she's working for a law firm, and she's going to go into law school here in a couple of years. So they're a couple of go-getters, and they're my inspiration in that category. And I have no problem writing about female heroes because I got two that
Uh,
are around me all the time.
and we should mention you have a son in the Coast Guard. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
my son is in the Coast Guard, and he is a lieutenant, and he's a great guy too, and he's a great inspiration, and he's a great source of information for me
Oh
too,
yeah,
because I can get a lot of military stuff from him.
yeah. One of the other things I note is I mentioned in the introduction is that you write in multiple genres. Most authors stick with the one that they got them in the first place and don't expand it. You kind of feeling like you're like an actor who's taking a lot of different kind of roles so you don't get typecast. Does that figure into that a bit?
A bit. I mean, I just want to tell the story.
Hmm.
I have these stories that I want to write and I want to tell, and if they uh what genre they fall in, that's just the way it is. Like I have historical fiction. Like one of my most popular books is Brandy, Ballad of a Pirate Princess, and
Hmm.
that took place in the 1830s and 40s. And so I had to study that whole area and time and history and all that. I just had to put it in a book, and because it was that type of book about pirates and stuff, there was a lot of romance and intrigue, and female protagonists, which was very popular. Having a female as the head lead in a story about pirates back then was kind of cool. But me, it's just wherever the story leads me. I got a story in my mind. I want to tell it. I mean, yeah, I know they want, like, especially agents and publishing houses, they want you to stick with the genre, and I get it, because yeah,
Yeah,
I'm a businessman. I understand
yeah,
marketability in certain areas, but
yeah.
it's wherever the story leads me. Yeah.
Well, that's great to hear. By the way, I note that Brandy, Belle of the Pirate Princess was the 2021 Historical Fiction Book of the Year, which is
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
must feel you're gonna have to be in a bigger shelf for your awards. I can see that coming in the future. Um, Fun stuff. Let's see what else I had. There's so many things to go with this book. Um, I want to ask you about research because you talked a bit about that in talking about the Navy SEAL stuff, but I have a feeling you've done a lot of research. All the details ring true to me.
Yeah, I think it's really important if you're going to talk about a subject to have your facts right. And plus you just learn so much. I
Hmm.
mean, there's one scene in the training where I have Tommy, they're doing the whole boat race thing
Oh
where
yes.
they got a team of like 7 or 8 guys. They pick up a raft and they run it for a certain amount of period to get to the ocean. And they push out in the ocean and they got to row out to a certain point and roll back and then run up a hill and they race. And and I read that in a SEALs book, and I read that whole scenario where Tommy's team was winning too much, and this other leader's team was losing too much. So the officers in charge got together and said, "We got to do something about this. This guy's winning too much. This other guy's losing too much. So what we need to do is switch them. They're gonna take over each other's crews." And I read that whole scenario in that book, and then I read the officer that was writing the book. He was telling how he used that to teach both these guys a lesson. One guy to get him out of his slump, and another guy to expand his 9 dots.
Yeah.
Think out how to take a demoralized team and moralize them again. Get them encouraged. And so that was really cool to put in there. And I never would have had that scene in there if I hadn't done the research because I wouldn't have known it.
Yeah. One of the traps, research traps, is you get going and you just don't want to stop researching
Oh
because it's
yeah,
so much fun. At some point, you have to sit down and say, "Okay, I've got to put this in the
right.
computer and get this going out through." I know that you. I'm not sure about, but you have self-published some of your books. How
Yes.
does that work out for you? I mean,
Well,
obviously it does, but how
it's
difficult was it?
it's a real dangerous world out there in the self-publication market. I mean, you really got to watch, who you work with and who you don't. And I've had some bad experiences. But I have developed a very good team of people that I work with. I got a woman uh, down by Colorado, and she does she constructs my books. She's the one that puts it all together and gets it formatted and fitted and gets the covers done and all that. And I have some very good editors that I use. One man I use, my main editor, is a man by the name of Tom Hyman. He was a New York Times bestseller back in the 90s, so he really knows how to help me with my books and really put them together. And you just got to develop a team, and you got to bite the bullet and be willing to spend a little money on it.
Hmm.
I mean, really, I've talked to lots of authors that want to self-publish, but they don't want to put into any, they don't want to blow any money on it. And I'm telling, I says, look, you might think you're the smartest person in the world and that you're very intelligent. You got all these degrees and you think you're going to write something that's going to be perfect. Those reviewers out there are going to eat you alive if you don't dot your I's and cross your T's, so to
Yeah.
speak. You
And
need other eyes on that manuscript to help you make it right.
absolutely, absolutely. I was a newspaper editor, and everybody had to read proof of the page before it went out the door because
Heck yeah.
everybody sees things differently. I want to compliment you too on the choices of your covers. You have some very good, outstanding covers. I mean, in
Thank you.
fact, they should go to your website and check it out. Why don't we mention that website for all of our listeners, by the way?
It's DanEHendrickson.com, all lowercase, spelled Dan, then E, then Hendrickson, HENDRICKSON.com. And you can find all my books there. You can find the awards that each book has won. And I have a little blog there. I even have a little YouTube podcast that I've done where I've interviewed some of the people that I've trained with in martial arts. And we're developing more on that category as well. But just been a little busy with launching this book lately.
Well, I checked that on the website, and I was intrigued to see that you had done that. Let's talk just a second about one of the folks that you interviewed in the martial arts category, who has quite a reputation.
Yeah, that would be Bill Shaw. He is now I interviewed 2 guys. I interviewed Bill Shaw and Troy Miller. and they're both Hollywood stuntmen. Now, Troy Mill and I both trained under Bill Shaw back in the early 80s. But Bill Shaw is one of the original shakers and movers of the freestyle martial arts movement that happened back in the 70s that catapulted from the Bruce Lee Jeet Kune Do era. And he came to Wyoming back when I was in college, and I just got done with high school, and I boxed through high school, so I wanted to try something different. So I got into martial arts, and I got into martial arts under him. And he is just an incredible guy. He's choreographed movies like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Get Carter with Sylvester Stallone. He choreographed a lot of the fight scenes there. He was in that. He's worked with people like Drew Barrymore and Billy Zabka from Cobra Kai. He did all the shoot fighter movies with him. And, so he's got a really good understanding of, fighting theatrically and fighting for real. He's also trained lots of law enforcement people, lots of military people. And people ask me about my fight scenes, and they ask me how come they're so realistic. And I say, well, it's Bill Shaw. He taught me how to think through a fight scene, because his philosophy was, if you can't see it up here, you're not going to get it out here. And he says you got to be able to plan out your moves and your strategy in your mind and see it before it happens. And so years and years of being trained that way. And then when I became an instructor, I did the same thing. Made it very easy for me to put that on paper, because somebody attacks you with a certain attack, then you have like about 3 or 4 moves that you're going to counter with, and then you're going to go with a takedown or a strike or a knockout move or something like that. And it's really easy to just type it, because I was teaching it all the time.
Did you train your kids?
Oh yeah, all my kids have black belts.
Good, great. That's being a good dad there.
Yeah.
Though I have to say, part of that would be, can I really hit you, Dad? Well, you can try.
Yeah. Oh, they did. Especially my son. When he got older, he got faster and stronger.
This is, I guess, one of the things that I enjoyed about it is the fact you blend all this so seamlessly that you could have, I didn't quite, it was like 2 sessions, but you could have easily sit down and read this in one absorbing session. And I think that some of the reviews I've seen have said they did just that because they could not put it down. That's got to be very satisfying to you to hear that.
It is, and it goes back to my my journalism background. My instructor in journalism was a man named Dr. Dan Jones, and he taught us to write in the first person, not first person, I'm sorry, third person present tense.
Yeah.
Third person present tense. And he said that he wanted us to do that because that keeps the reader right in the situation. It's not like they're reading about something that happened yesterday, which, you're a newspaper guy, so you understand that. When they're reading it, it's almost like you want them to think they're seeing it on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to keep them right there involved with it. And that's what I thought, wow, this would be a great way to tell a story, because it's like watching a movie, and I started experimenting with my first book, and I got a lot of good comments about it. I got some people who were a little shocked about it at first because they weren't used to it, because everybody's like first person, past tense is basically simple past tense is what most books are written in. Right. But there are a few that do this. And I think it's very good for a shorter book, because it keeps people involved and it keeps them glued to the page. I don't know how well it worked for a really long book, like a 500-page book or something. You might get exhausted after a while. I haven't tried that yet. My books are basically between 60 and 80,000 words.
Yeah. And then again, having read many of them in the 400 or 500 page category, it's refreshing to have something that just crisply gets you there and does the job. So where do you see I know that there's always a lag time between when you write and when it's published. What are you working on now?
Well, actually right now I am working on something totally different. I do have a very deep background in the Christian ministry, and I am writing a historical fiction about the wise men in Matthew chapter 2 and what they went through to get from the Parthian Empire into the Roman Empire controlled, Israel was a Roman
Hmm.
state of the Roman Empire, and it wasn't an easy task, and I always knew that, but I just started really studying it and figuring out what would it take for an entourage of noblemen from an enemy empire to enter the Roman Empire, and especially someone like Herod the Great's place.
Yeah.
Okay. And because he was a vicious man, and he was an opportunist. How did they get in there? How were they able to just go to Bethlehem and see this child and be unhindered? I mean, there had to be more behind it. The Bible tells what, the Bible shows exactly the way God wanted it to be shown in that instance, but that there's a backstory there.
Hmm.
And so I went back and I studied it, and I found out what the legal and cultural things they'd have to go through to get there. And I also looked at all the astronomical, the scientific background to all that. And I
Yeah.
put together a book about it's written, and it's at its first editor, but I put together a book about a young Parthian military officer who was the son of a great general that actually defeated a Roman army once. This guy named Serena, it's a real guy. And how he encounters a magi and learns that he's called to study the stars with them. And he goes off to Babylon from the Parthian capital, and he spends a couple of years there, and they see the astronomical signs while he's there, and he helps them with his background and politics stuff to get to safe passage all the way to Jerusalem. And that's a long book, and I think it's just the best thing I've ever done, but we'll see. I think every author
So,
thinks that way.
well, and it'll be coming out later this year, obviously.
Yeah, I'm hoping I'll have it out before Christmas next year.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. Is there anything we have not covered that you want to make sure that our listeners and your readers know?
Well, you can get my books on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. They're in digital and in hard, so you can get Kindle or Nook. Also, a few of them are on Apple and Kobo and a couple other areas. And yeah, that's about it. I mean, oh yeah, I have 3 books in audio now. I
Oh,
wanted to mention that. So The Good
congratulations.
Fight is on audio on Amazon. The Cartel Crusher is on audio, and Brandy, Ballad of a Pirate Princess just got put on audio in December. So that if you're an audio fan, I got 3 of them so far out.
Okay. I also have to ask you one parenthetical weird question. And I also spent time as a DJ, and I have to ask if the name Brandy came from the Looking Glass song from the 1970s.
It was one of the big inspirations. Yeah, yeah,
Glad to
it
hear
was
that.
nice. And there's some subtle things in there from that song. Like I got the medallion,
Ah,
in there and all
excellent.
that. So
Oh,
yeah.
I love that. Our guest today has been Dan E. Hendrickson. The book is The Living Legend. Highest possible recommendation. Go out and get multiple copies for everybody you know. Thanks so much for being with us today. You've been wonderful.
Well, thanks, Roger. It's been great.